Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition is Ninja JaJaMaru Ginga Daisakusen, which is a big mouthful to say. It's part of the Ninja JaJaMaru series, and actually the 5th game in the series. It's a relatively long-running series in Japan, but only a few games actually saw release in North America, and unfortunately, this is one of the games that did not come to North America. It was released for the Famicom in 1991, and was scheduled to be brought over to North America as Squashed. But unfortunately, the game was cancelled and it never made it over. The translation for the name basically means Ninja JaJaMaru Galactic Battle, which is what it's called in the fan translation that we're going to be playing here. You can play the game actually 1 or 2 player, and it's cool because there's actually 2 playable characters in the game. You can either play as Jaja or Sakura. And I'm going to play as Sakura during this run, though I do find it funny, you can actually pick random and it'll just select one of the 2. So if you play through the game and you can't decide which one you want to try out, just pick the random button, though the characters play very similar to one another. When you start off, you'll notice that the graphics are quite colorful, and it looks like some of the other games made by Jaleco at the time, like for example Wampum. Now, as Sakura, we're going to be able to bounce on a lot of the enemies throughout the game. That's one of the reasons why I think it was called Squashed when it was going to be brought over to North America, because that's basically what you do. Of course, we're all familiar with Super Mario Brothers, where that is the main goal of Mario, is to usually jump on a lot of the enemies' heads, so you'll have no problem adjusting to the gameplay here in Ninja JaJaMaru. One of the things you'll notice right away is you actually can charge up and run in the game, and this will also allow you to jump higher, and you have to do this and kind of master this throughout the game in order to reach onto certain platforms. You can look at the bottom of the screen, and actually it's very similar to Super Mario Bros. 3 with the way it's kind of laid out. You'll have your life count and the square below it, and you have your timer on the far right. In the game, you only have 1 hit though. You probably noticed at the bottom of the screen it's actually very similar to Super Mario Bros. 3. On the far left side you will have your life count and the score below it. To the right you have your timer. There is no health bar because unfortunately it's a 1-hit KO for your character, though you can get a few items to help you out in the game. Some of the items include a spacesuit, which will give you an extra hit. You'll have letters to collect, which will actually appear in the lower right corner where that monster's face currently is. Collecting 3 letters will actually allow you to kind of have like a little bit of an advantage during boss encounters. Similar to Bart vs. the Space Mutants, where you collected all the letters of a Simpsons character's name and they helped you during a boss fight. It's similar to that, but not exactly. There's items like the ability to turn into a ball for a period of time and kind of roll through, as well as the moon boomerangs, a boomerang-like weapon that you'll be able to throw out at enemies in order to attack them that way. Here is the first of the letter orbs that I end up collecting. It's the only one I end up actually getting during the course of the stage. Since you only have 1-hit deaths, this is what makes the game challenging, because overall it's just a pretty fun platformer. But that added challenge of course not being able to take a hit is really what revs up the difficulty. Dropping down here, we will enter the first boss encounter. The boss will come out on the right side and lower to the bottom. Once it's popping out of that right side, we're going to jump on its head 4 times, back to back to back to back. The boss will easily be defeated and explode into happy, smiling faces. And then we'll have a very Mario 3-esque cutscene before we move on to level number 2. Level number 2 is more space-themed, as you'll notice is a kind of a key thing to most of the worlds that we're traveling through, as this is a galactic battle of a game. Jumping up here, you'll be able to get this item here, which is the spacesuit. Like I mentioned before, this basically gives you an extra hit, like grabbing a mushroom in Mario, where you'll be able to now take a hit before you end up dying. Though, with bosses, it doesn't matter. Even with the spacesuit, if you get hit by a boss, you end up instantly dying. Grabbing the boomerang here, you'll now notice that in the center area here, it actually has the timer. I ended up getting the clock right afterwards as well. Basically, there's your item placement. The amount that you'll see tick down is how long that you currently have the item for. The timer being one of the weakest because it just freezes the timer, and usually you'll have plenty of time in order to get through the levels. Now here's the weird wheel-like thing that lets me kind of like roll with my jumps. I do a special kind of ninja style spinning jump whenever I go into the air for right now. Going over to the far right and entering inside the tube, we will go inside of the spaceship here. Be careful of the cannons, and then we're going to travel down the pipe located to the far right here, and then continue along the way. You'll notice kind of the orb sticking out of the bottom here, and you can hit it, and you can get yourself into the giant frog mech. This is one of the coolest abilities in the game. The only issue with it is getting it right here. I have to go up that other pipe, so while it's cool to look at and move around with, I only have one enemy that ends up helping me to take out before I just have to kind of just waste the rest of the ability, and then after it goes away, I can finally go through that pipe. Here I collected the third and final letter that I need. I have 3 letters now. Continuing to the right here, we're going to do a big running jump. Charge up your run and dash, and then make a huge, giant leap over that big gap. Continue along the way, going up the next pipe, and be very cautious of the cannons that are going to be firing at you. And then you have to do kind of another running jump in order to actually make it into the warp at the top portion of the screen. Now, once you're in here, you're going to have to bounce off these springs and climb on the walls. It's a bit tricky because you fall down the walls pretty fast, and you have to time it just right so you'll be able to leap over to like the center platforms, bounce off enemy heads to avoid taking damage. It takes some getting used to. I ended up struggling the first kind of time I went through this particular area. It's a relatively long journey, and it can be a bit difficult, especially with the smaller platforms like this one here. But when you land on it, just do the big running leap over to the far left or right side that you need to in order to land on the wall safely. Eventually, though, we will finally reach the top here and go through the next room. And inside here, it's time, well, to battle the next boss. In the lower right corner, the creature is now alive and will help us out in the fight. As you can see, he'll throw out kind of a projectile at the boss. Though what it ends up really doing, sometimes it's actually kind of hard to really gather. I don't know if I can jump on it to help me out, but either way, the UFO boss will kind of just hover down a little bit. I can jump on his head 4 times, defeat him, and move on to the next level. Next up, we move to World 3, and you'll quickly notice that this planet is a fire-themed planet. You're going to have some tough platforming right away at the very beginning, because they're kind of a little bit small moving platforms, so it's a bit tricky to kind of jump on them and safely make it over to the far right. Here I got the Jetpack ability, which will allow you to float for a little bit if you want to use it, but it of course doesn't last too long like all the other items in the game, so it really isn't all that useful to me. There's a lot of angry-looking fire all along the bottom, and of course, if you're landing on it, it's gonna mean death for us, so we're gonna, of course, avoid falling off these platforms. When you go over to the right here, you're going to see these big flame towers, but don't worry, they're just in the background. It's kind of deceiving, because you may think they're actually going to be able to hit you when you run into them if you don't accidentally jump over them, but they're no threat to you. When you make it to the far right here, we're going to blast up the waterfall and move on to the next section. Once here, start working your way up. Along the way, you will have those turrets set up on the sides of this area that will fire down at you in a diagonal pattern, so be cautious when jumping up. There's also some of the other robots set up here that may end up hitting you, like if you're accidentally jumping up and you don't notice one's above you, you may accidentally run into it from below. After a bit of this, you will come to this elevator segment that will go up. Be careful not to ride it all the way to the top, though, because there are spikes waiting for you, so wait here on this platform. You have the time to jump correctly, so you can kind of jump up and land on the platform that's moving up and down. This takes some practice. As you noticed, I held in the running spin move for too long, and I end up kind of just petering out, and then having to catch my breath before I'm able to continue to jump my way up. When you make it up here, be careful of the spikes. Attach yourself to the left wall, and then we're going to jump up into the warp above. In the next section, there's a turret right in front of you, so be cautious, be quick, so that you can get past the turret before it ends up firing at you. The good thing, though, about the bullets from them, as you noticed, you can jump on the bullets from them, but if you're, like, standing, of course, right next to it, it'll end up firing directly at you. Pretty straightforward area, though. There's some hills and platforms that you'll have to jump around, and as long as you're able to avoid those cannons, you'll have no problem here. Eventually, we're going to take the top path here. You'll come to a bunch of arrows, and going into that, we will warp to the next section. It's time for the next boss fight. Now, this boss is a little bit different than some of the other ones we've dealt with. You actually have to hit the buttons on the left and right side. As you can see, when you hit it, it ends up doing damage. Now, you can bounce on top of the guy. You just have to make sure that you avoid the projectiles that it ends up firing out. After you're able to hit each of the buttons 2 times a piece, so 4 total, he will be defeated and we move on to the next world. Next up is the first of the scrolling levels in the game. In a level like this, of course, our goal is to keep being able to safely land on each of the platforms and not fall down into the vast abyss below us. The screen will speed up at times, but the overall pattern of jumping from the platform to platform is pretty simple for on NES platforming standards. Just kind of take your time with it. The platforms never start speeding up way too fast, so you shouldn't have too much trouble. After a bit of a journey, you'll be able to land safely on a rock up here. Be careful of one last little tiny pit there, and jump into the warp up above. Now for the next section, drop down, we can immediately grab one of the letter orbs in order to put one of those in the lower right corner, and then start making our way. The area is a little bit tight, and there's a bunch of enemies, a couple of bigger style enemies that are set up here, so be careful of them. And you also have these guys that kind of jump, but they will actually jump right over your head in an arcing pattern, so you should be able to kind of run underneath of them. When you make it over to this side, we're going to do a running jump over to the right side. When you see these guys pop up, though, if you're not close enough where you can just let them kind of jump over you, you may have to wait for them to jump and land, and then attack them, and then continue along your way. Like I mentioned, a couple of the areas are a little bit small, so some of the bigger enemies may give you a bit of a trouble, but you shouldn't have too much issue getting over to the next warp and going in. Now begins one of the worst parts of this entire game, the warp maze. Here you have to enter a series of warps going from room to room to room in order to eventually make it through. Just like a lot of annoying mazes on the NES, this one is no exception. Just follow the path that I end up taking to get along. You'll be doing a lot of warps, so get used to that kind of warp animation that happens anytime you enter a warp in the game. You're going to see it a lot during the course of the section. There are also some enemies, of course, in each of the areas and rooms, so you'll have to avoid getting hit by those guys, so always be cautious before trying to just beeline right for the correct warp. This room here is one of the trickiest ones, as you have 3 warps on the right side. The one you want is actually the one in the middle. In this room, you're going to have to do a nicely timed running charge jump to get straight up into the air so that you'll be able to hit the warp. This one's a bit hard to hit sometimes. While this place is pretty long, thankfully a lot of the warps are relatively straightforward, as there's only one other warp to enter in a particular area. Once again, you'll make it to another area, though, that does have 3 warps. We're going to take the one in the upper left corner, and now you're just going to be going from warp to warp to warp to warp to get through here. The next room is more of the same, where you're just gonna appear from one warp and jump right into the next one. After a bit of a struggle, I'm finally able to get to the top warp here, and we're finally moving on to the next area, which is, of course, the boss fight. For this boss, it's a bunch of targets appearing above you. After they flash for a whole bunch of times, eventually they will slow up their speed, and the boss will actually fall down. It's basically a giant version of one of the green alien monsters we dealt with earlier. Like always, we're going to be jumping on his head in order to hit him, and after doing 4 jumps on his head, he'll be defeated. Just wherever he ends up stopping, he'll drop down. Be careful of the projectiles he fires out. And especially after going through that whole maze, we want to make sure that we're able to actually take out this boss. But like a lot of the bosses in the game, he's pretty simple. At the beginning of the next level, the enemy on the far right will start throwing blocks at you, so be ready to jump over them. In this section here, we're going to have to make some quick jumps, because of course as soon as we land on the platform, as you see, we end up falling down. Do a big running leap. You have to kind of time it just right so that you'll get enough momentum so that you'll be able to get over the wall here, especially if the little spring guy that could have helped you up ended up falling into the pit already. Here we're going to either wait, or you can bounce right off the projectile that the guy's throwing at you so that you can continue on. And when you make it over here, some things will end up popping out of the ground trying to like jump up as you're jumping over the pits. But since they're relatively slow, you can actually make it past them before they even jump up. On the far end here, we're going to make another running leap and then go down the large pipe. Once inside here, be very careful. You'll have these big swinging things on the ceiling that are going to be able to easily hit you if you move too quickly. bait them, wait for them to kind of go across so that you can actually end up getting past wherever they're hanging from, or if they're on the ground, wait for them to go into the ground before trying to jump on top of them. As long as you don't jump on the spiky portion of them, you'll be able to defeat them. Right over here, you can see the area is really small, but if you're quick about the jumps, you can still jump up, hit them, and keep your momentum going. Just like we've been doing, bait these things to swing and close into the ground, and then we're going to make a big running leap jump up to the very top portion here. At the end, we'll find ourselves at another warp, and we can move on to the next section. Now in the next part, we're going to be dropping downwards, and you're just going to keep going down and down, but be very careful. Of course, there's going to be enemies. There's these spike drills that are coming out of the left and right side, as well as spikes lining a few of the floors in the area. Thankfully, most of the spikes are in kind of the left and far right side, so you should be able to avoid them if you stick to more of the middle sections, but you still have to be at least a little bit cautious. For the next boss, what you have to do is when he turns around, you're going to do a nice timed jump so you can land on top of him, and then get into the far right corner and just keep bouncing on his head over and over until he's defeated. If you time it right, you'll be able to completely avoid any of the obstacles, like the things that ended up jumping out of the middle when he ended up slamming down his hammer. World number 6 is easily my favorite of the levels in the game, and this is the Space Crypt. A lot of classic platform games have not only space levels, but also graveyard or undead haunted mansion style levels, but for this game they actually combine the two into a space graveyard. You'll have ghosts that are coming in, you have like this icy ground that you're going to have to travel across, so it combines a few different elements for an overall interesting stage, and it's also a relatively challenging stage as far as this game is concerned. The second section, though, is a scrolling section, and you're going to have these blue jumping up and down guys. Before, you could kind of like bypass them, hit them once, but now since they're kind of bouncing at you, the screen's kind of pulling you in that direction, you have to be careful when you decide to finally make your leap and land on top of them. Throughout the area is also these kind of green snake-like cannons with their open mouths firing cannonballs at you. You can stand in between them or duck underneath the cannonballs, whatever you need to do to avoid the fire. Of course, with this being a scrolling area, it's going to take a bit of time to get through. Like I said, the hardest part, though, is the bouncing, jumping enemies, because you have to just time it right because of the way everything's kind of set up. They can kind of land on some of the platforms themselves and get a little bit higher up, so just wait for those right opportunities in order to take them out. Just like with the previous scrolling segment of the game, it is a relatively long one to get through as well. It can be difficult because of the amount of enemies that you're dealing with. After a pretty darn long journey, we finally find the warp and make it to the end of the ship, and we can move on to that next segment. Once inside the ship, we're going to be heading left. Be very careful, it's another one of those bouncing blue guys that we should be pretty used to by now. And you're going to need to use the conveyor belt and do a running leap to get over the spikes. It takes a little bit of practice here just because you'll have to make the charge while you're on the moving conveyor belt, so make sure you have enough room. Unfortunately, when I make the charge here, I run right into one of the enemies and end up losing my spacesuit. Wait for this guy to stop bouncing before I attempt to jump on him, and then make sure you hold down the duck button before you completely clear all of the spikes so you don't accidentally let go too soon and, of course, end up getting a spike to the head. When you make it to the right, though, and go through the warp, you enter the boss chamber, but you actually don't have to fight a boss here for World 6. After the cutscene, we go right to World 7. World 7 is the final stage of the game, and we start off with a cloud segment. We're going to be working our way downwards. We have to jump on the buttons on these barriers in order to get rid of them so that we can then go down. Along the way, there are several enemies that are going to be trying to get us, including the drills that we dealt with earlier in the game that come from the left and right side. There are enemy planes overhead, but if you're quick about it, the enemies will remain overhead, and you'll be able to open up those barriers and keep moving quickly through the stage. Now for the next segment, as soon as you land, you'll be on this giant kind of upward slope. Work your way all the way to the top, and you'll have to do a running jump, time it right so that you'll be able to get enough momentum to get up to the very top portion of it and then go down the opposite side. Be careful when you come down that opposite side, though, because there are some spikes waiting for you at the bottom. As you can see, they're kind of moving up and down, and there are a few enemies. There's a lot of kind of small platforms you'll have to deal with as well throughout this mechanical landscape. And with this being the final stage of the game, there's no wonder why it's a little bit more challenging. There are a lot of spikes here and a lot of moving platforms. They all move in a set pattern, though, back and forth and sometimes diagonally. So once you kind of know you'll be safe, then attempt your jumps. When you make it to the end here, take this platform as it'll slowly rise up and you'll be able to reach the door. Once inside the ship, be very careful of these giant cone drill spikes that will go up and down depending upon which direction they're facing. Wait for them to completely get off screen, or if you do have enough space, you can attempt to jump over them because they do move slowly, but since they take up a lot of space, you have to be very careful if you decide to kind of jump ahead of time. As you can see, it's usually best to kind of just wait for them to kind of go off screen. The enemies here are large, but are pretty easy to land on. You'll make it to the right here, you'll find this yellow pipe. Go up the pipe and then get on the right moving platforms to traverse over a whole nother set of spikes. Now here, an anti-gravity type thing is going to happen when you hit the button. When you hit the button again, you're going to reverse gravity, so make sure the platform is below you before you hit it. Then make a huge leap over to the right while you're rotating in a ball in order to make it here, and you'll have to end up hitting this guy, which can be a bit tricky. You want to wait till he's on the far left edge so that when you jump off, you'll just hit the ceiling and land on top of him. It's now time for the final boss of the game. Hang out on the left or right sides. The giant machine will move back and forth and then crash in the middle. Charge up your run so that you're ready for when it crashes down, you'll be able to jump up and land on top of it. With a little bit of practice, you should have the timing down pretty quickly of being able to time that charged up running attack and then be able to safely land on top of the boss. As long as you're staying on that left and right side, you'll be able to dodge all his attacks. Once he disappears, though, you'll be able to sit back and relax and enjoy the ending to Ninja JaJaMaru. So there you have Ninja JaJaMaru Galactic Battle. As you can clearly see, the game was very much inspired by platformers, especially Super Mario Bros. 3. And unfortunately, it, as well as a lot of other games that were inspired around the same time, never made it in North America. It was getting later in the NES, and I guess they figured that if they had Mario 3, a lot of fans wouldn't go out and buy games similar to it. So unfortunately, this and another one of my favorite Famicom imports, Armadillo, never made it to North American shores. The game, though, is part of the long-running Ninja-kun, Ninja JaJaMaru series. I mean, there's 6 games in this particular series, a bunch in the Ninja-kun series, and a few spin-off games as well. There's a great article on hardcoregaming101.net covering all the games in the series. One of the few other ones that actually made it to North America was a Game Boy game called Maru's Mission. As we see our main characters of Jaja and Sakura running across the center here with the end, just kind of going back and forth in a loop. That is the end, and you can reset and start it all over again, but that will wrap up this episode of Play It Through. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider giving it a thumbs up or commenting down below. If you enjoyed this Play It Through, be sure to check out my Play It Through of Maru's Mission. It's part of the same series as this game, and actually is one of the few that came over to North America. It also has one of the worst box arts on the Nintendo Game Boy by far. I also want to give a huge special, of course, thank you to all the members on my Patreon. Without their support, I would not be able to keep doing what I'm doing. There's a link down in the bottom, and when I can, I will also, of course, put an annotation right where the big Patreon button is for you guys to click that. As little as $1 a month can keep this channel going, and I mean it. Their support is able to keep all the play-it-throughs, reviews, the streams, and all the other content amongst my channels going. So anyway, guys, though, thank you so much for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.